Here's a site with a great font pairing. It feels super cool. And here's a recipe app with one of the same fonts, but zero pizzazz. Here's a charity that has another great font pairing. And here's a charity that I love using one of the same fonts, but the type just leaves something to be desired. So what makes the difference between top-notch font pairings and designs that just feel off? I've never seen someone explain this super clearly, so I'm going to do it myself. What I'm about to describe is what great visual designers do by tacit gut instinct, and most could never even articulate it, but I'm going to lay it out in 5 repeatable, clear steps. By the way, hey, I'm Eric Kennedy. I'm a freelance UX and UI designer. I am also the founder of Learn UI Design, where I teach user interface design and user experience design to over 5,000 folks around the world, including from top companies like Apple, Google, and Stripe. All right, now let's pop open the hood and see what it takes to make your type pairing game top-notch in 5 steps. If you're going to have an amazing font pairing, you must take the time to specify how you want to be perceived. Maybe you want like a techie and a futuristic vibe, or maybe you're going for something friendly and approachable. For starters, you can think of your brand as being a list of adjectives that describe how you want to be perceived. And if you want a really great design, get really granular with those adjectives. Like, here are 75. Comb through them. What fits? Is your app capricious? Is your app Spartan? Maybe both? Nah, that's weird. The more granular and specific you get, the more ammo you'll have to match fonts with those brands, which is what we're going to do in the next step. If you want the 80-20 hack of determining your brand, I have this grand unified theory of UI design that there's really only like 5 major brands, and 80% of clients and projects just need one of the following: clean and simple, modern, minimalist. 2, fancy/classy or luxurious. 3, friendly or informal or casual. 4, quirky or kind of design forward or offbeat. And 5, techie, sciencey, futuristic, authoritative, that kind of thing. So if you can pattern match your brand to 1 or 2 of those categories, just check out the relevant font classifications here. All right, now let's look at an example. Let's say we're working on a website that has nonfiction articles about ancient Egypt. The articles are research-backed, they're scholarly, and yet we want them to be accessible to the casual reader. Now, determining brand adjectives is a conversation you'd have with your client, but just totally winging it for the sake of this video, I would say things like trustworthy, ancient, mysterious, maybe, informative, modern, scholarly, professional. Now, note that I'm not thinking of fonts yet. I'm 100% in vibes land. I even have conflicting adjectives. Modern, ancient, just trust the process, bro. So this is our brand for now. Let's move on to step 2. Step 2, brainstorm fonts that subtly convey your brand. Now, you're going to find a bunch of fonts in this step that subtly match 1 or more of your brand adjectives, and there's really 2 classic mistakes to watch out for. Mistake number 1, the font doesn't actually convey your brand. So a good example here would be Chakra Petch, which is an excellent font, very cool, but this angular geometric feel of the letter forms is just totally off base for something that's about ancient Egypt and is scholarly. The second big mistake is choosing a font that matches your brand, but it's just too over the top. For our ancient Egypt site, the obvious choice here is Papyrus, the bane of graphic designers everywhere. Papyrus is famous for appearing in settings that have nothing to do with ancient Egypt, like Irish pubs, dark urban fantasy novels, NASA missions. But the issue here is that Papyrus is not subtly ancient Egypt. It's like bash you over the skull with ancient Egypt. This over-the-top brand strength is appropriate for like video games and movies, but for 99% of UI projects, it's way too much. So unless you're working on the excellent 1999 real-time strategy game Pharaoh, put down Papyrus and pick up something else. But what do you pick up? For me, 90% of the time, I'm going to the Good Fonts table, which is a resource that I've compiled and refined over a decade plus. The Good Fonts table has over 100 free and cheap fonts, along with notes on their brand, type samples, links, features, descriptions, all of that stuff. I use it for virtually every single project that I work on, but the Good Fonts table is part of Learn UI Design and is only accessible to my design students. You can check out more at learnui.design. The standard way of attacking this problem is to find something, anything that kind of matches at least 1 brand adjective, and then jump around to other similar stuff. For example, let's start with Crimson Pro, a serif font that subtly conveys ancient, historical, scholarly work. Is it perfect? No, I don't think I'm going to use it, but it's somewhere to start. Now, the goal is to just branch out, and I made this spiderweb visualization so you can see kind of what this looks like. If I start with something like Crimson or Trajan, then maybe I'm using the category as a means of finding similar fonts, just Googling for old style serif fonts. Maybe I find another font I like Scala, and then I could use a site like Typewolf to find similar fonts there. For me, I'm just going to use the good fonts table too, which is organized by category, so I can easily find similar options to anything I like. This diagram isn't huge, but when I did the real exercise, I ended up pulling 100 fonts in like 10 minutes and just dumping them all into Figma. And frankly, all of the fonts that I picked kind of fell into two different categories representing the two different facets of the brand adjectives I came up with. So the trustworthy, informative, modern, professional lends itself better to sans serifs. And advanced type tip, probably humanist sans serifs, which are the most formal type of sans. The ancient, mysterious, scholarly facet of my brand definitely lends itself more to serif fonts. And again, advanced type tip, the sub-classification I'm looking at is old style serifs, which are typically the most historical feeling serifs. Now we have a bunch of fonts, it's time to start narrowing things down. Step 3, choose a body font that's legible. So both your header font and your body font need to match your brand adjectives, but the body font has an additional constraint, which is that it needs to be legible at small sizes. How do you know if a font is legible? Look, we could talk about high X heights and open counters all day, but here's the number one hack. The designer describes the font as legible. Okay, but two caveats here. First of all, maybe they use the word legible, but maybe they use a different term like body or book or text or editorial or workhorse. All of these words, if you can find them in the font description, signal legibility. And second, maybe you're not going to find the designer themselves talking about it, but you do find a type expert's opinion, or maybe it's the distributor of the font. Either of those things will work. To make this example real, if we look at Crimson Pro on Google Fonts, we're on the About tab, we scroll down, let's see here, rounded and open, that's a little bit of a buzzword there, editorial, reading experience, book length text. Look, they don't even need to use the word legibility, and we already know this one is definitely legible. Same thing with Scala Sans, which is another one of the fonts that I've narrowed down on. It's not on Google Fonts, but if I find the purchase page on My Fonts, I can go down here and see, workhorse, open, legibility, and there we are, smaller point sizes, so we know that this font is going to work as well. And let's contrast that with one like Cinzel, which is another font that I looked at. If I go to the About tab and look here, there's nothing about legibility. Classical proportions, okay, fine, it's not revivalism, whatever. All of this stuff should be kind of obvious in retrospect because this font doesn't even have lowercase characters. It's supposed to look like a Roman inscription or something, and that's the goal. The goal is something entirely different than legibility. And just a note on this step, you don't have to pick out the body font before you pick out the header font, but because it has this extra legibility constraint, I put it as step 3. But now we can talk about step 4. Choose a header font that conveys a different aspect of your brand. By way of example, check out this meh font pairing. This is Inter and Figtree. Inter is clean, Figtree is clean, but together, they're kind of terrible, right? The more you stare at this, the more you realize there's no coherent message coming back to you. Why? Because the fonts are saying very similar things. They're kind of clean and simple and modern, and there's not even really a strong reason to use two at all. By the way, this is why the most common font pairing advice you hear is pair a serif and a sans serif font, because if you do that, you at least won't fall into the mistake of having two fonts that convey the same exact brand. But that rule is a heuristic, not a dogma. You can pair two sans serif fonts if they convey different facets of the brand. So here's the Santa Fe Institute, which does this nicely. On one hand, we have Chap, the header font here, and it's just super quirky. If you look, this R has a very weird join right here. The counter of the E seems to be kind of tilted from the outside of the letter form. Some of the terminals are little sharp points, and then other ones are more squared off. it's just kind of a quirky random font, and it's paired with something that's a little bit different. This body font, Barlow, is much more clean and simple. It's a little squared off, so I'd say it kind of has a bit of a techie feel, but at the point sizes you see it at, it's just sort of grounding the design with a little bit of neutrality. So the header font brings the quirkiness, and the body font here brings a little bit of technical neutrality. Now that we have a bunch of header choices and body font choices, we can start to just kind of narrow out combinations. And again, I had over 100 fonts picked out, so it's not like you're going to try all combinations possible, but just as you play around with a bunch, you'll notice certain things are kind of working and getting you closer. So one thing we can nix right away is Cinzel does not work as a body font, so this is definitely out. And frankly, Cinzel, even as a title font, feels like a little bit kitschier than I wanted. It's not appropriate for a scholarly publication, and it's more Roman than it is Egyptian, so screw it. Now we're getting into contenders that are a little bit harder to figure out. I would say, though, that using this font, Crimson Pro, as the title font, it just feels a little bit soft, right? If I zoom in, especially if I compare it here to Minion Pro, Crimson has these bigger, chunkier serifs, which just don't feel quite as formal. So this is nice, but I'm just saying, you know what? I don't think it's going to be the final choice. And then with this option, what I'm noticing is that Scala Sans, fantastic font, but imagine reading this for 10 minutes straight. That might start to feel a little bit more casual than I'm looking for in a scholarly publication. So I'm going to nix this one. Now I've got these two other options here, and frankly, both are quite good, right? It's not like it's obvious which of these body fonts is going to work best. Ultimately, I'd want to try them out in the full UI in a much more realistic mock-up, but if I had to call one right now, I would say that Minion Pro just looks a little bit sharper. It looks a little bit more upright and kind of has this formality to it. And so I have a slight preference for Minion Pro as the body text over Crimson. So bye-bye Crimson. And here is our pairing. Step 5, define your rules for usage. The more fonts you have on a page, the more important it is to be crystal clear about when and where you use each. So for example, on the Learn UI Design site, I use 3 fonts regularly. I use Rajdhani, but it's only used for subheaders, and so you'll only ever see it in uppercase, you'll only ever see it in semi-bold or bold. I also use for the body font, Avenir Next, but you will never see Avenir Next much bigger than this, and it's really only for running text. And then a third font that I use is Freight Text. But the rule of usage around Freight Text is that it's mostly for things that people are saying. It's for spoken or human content, like the questions in the FAQ, or if I scroll down, there's a little pull quote in the About Me section, or testimonials from students. These are the sorts of things that are in Freight Text. So technically, I paired a sans serif with a sans serif, but with solid rules of usage, it should never feel messy or inconsistent or overloaded, but you have to be the judge of that. As far as our Egyptology site, there's only 2 fonts, and so you could have a minimum rules of usage that says, look, just use Scala Sans for the headlines and subheaders, and use Minion for basically everything else that's kind of at body font size. But there is some room for play here, and this is one of the most fun things about pairing fonts. For instance, what about these little category labels over here? Right now, they're in Minion, but it does look pretty fresh to have them actually in the sans serif. And since they're all small little labels and not super long, we could do something like put them in uppercase and play with that. Maybe even make them bolder. Of course, now the visual weight's too much, so maybe we bring them down a few notches. But at some point, I'm ending up with a text style that's quite a bit different than anything else on the page, and I would need to define a rule of usage here because this just starts raising other questions. These are categories, but if I also have tags, do the tags need the same styling? Or there's no menu present up here, but if I had a nav menu at the top, would those short labels get the same treatment as right here? These questions, frankly, get trickier the more fonts you add, but this is the core of pairing fonts and doing so in a way where the result is on brand, top notch, and beautiful. If you want to master typography, check out Learn UI Design, my 35-hour video course on creating gorgeous interfaces. The typography unit breaks down all the things we've talked about: choosing fonts, pairing fonts, styling text, from long-form content to data-dense applications. There's over 5,000 students enrolled already, including from companies like Stripe, Apple, Google, and more. And if you just want a steady drip of practical original design writing, sign up for Design Hacks. That's my free newsletter. There's over 60,000 people subscribed, and when you sign up, I will send you a series of my best design tips. I hope this font pairing mini lesson was useful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I will try to respond to every single person who leaves a question. Cheers.